In a quiet corner of the mountains there stood a large mansion, hidden among tall pine trees and misty hills. The house was old but well kept, with wooden beams and stone walls that had weathered many winters. From the outside it looked calm and peaceful, but inside life moved with a quiet intensity. Every sound echoed through the tall ceilings, and every movement seemed to matter. The mansion belonged to a wealthy man who had lived there for many years. He was a solitary figure, someone people called a mountain man. Not because he lived in the mountains alone, but because he carried a certain strength, independence, and mystery about him. He had built his life carefully, surrounding himself with wealth and comfort, but not with many people. Few ever saw him up close, and fewer still were allowed into his inner circle. The mansion had many rooms, but most of them were empty, silent, or used only for decoration. The man had routines that he followed strictly, and every day had its own rhythm. He rose early, walked through the halls, inspected the grounds, and spoke rarely to anyone except when necessary. Some said he was strict, some said he was cold, but there was also a part of him that cared deeply about fairness and honesty. Among the few people who worked in the mansion, there was a maid. She had arrived months ago, carrying herself with quiet confidence and humility. She was pregnant, though she never spoke of the father, and she moved with care, aware of her condition but unwilling to let it slow her down. She was gentle, respectful, and hardworking, and she seemed to understand the mansion better than anyone else. She cleaned every room meticulously, cooked meals with care, and did her work without complaint. Yet despite her diligence, there was always an air of mystery about her. She spoke little about herself, kept her thoughts private, and moved through the mansion with a calm that both impressed and puzzled the mountain man. The man often watched her from a distance, observing her routines, noticing small habits, and trying to understand her character. He had always trusted the people he chose to work for him, but there was something about this maid that made him curious. He did not doubt her honesty entirely, but he wondered if there was more to her than met the eye. It was not malice or suspicion in the way of distrustful people. It was curiosity, a desire to know the truth about someone who seemed so capable and composed. Days passed in their usual rhythm. The maid would sweep the floors, dust the shelves, and tend to the fires in the grand rooms. She would prepare breakfast, serve it quietly, and then move on to her other tasks. The man would go about his work, walking through the gardens, checking on the animals, and reading in his study. Occasionally, their paths would cross in the kitchen or hallway. He would nod politely, and she would respond with a quiet, respectful greeting. Their interactions were simple, almost formal, yet there was a subtle connection that neither fully acknowledged. One morning, the mountain man noticed something small but unusual. The maid had left a cloth slightly out of place on the table in the dining room. It was not a big mistake, and it could have been overlooked easily, but it caught his attention. He wondered if it was an accident or if there was a reason behind it. Over the next few days, he began noticing little things. A window left slightly open, a drawer not fully closed, a stack of papers that seemed rearranged. None of these were serious problems, but together, they made him pause and think. He did not confront her, for he preferred observation over accusation. He wanted to see for himself what kind of person she truly was. That afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, he walked slowly through the halls, watching her work. She moved carefully, avoiding anything that might cause her harm, sometimes pausing to rest or lean against the wall. He saw the way she treated the animals, speaking softly to the horses and feeding the chickens with gentle hands. Everything she did spoke of care and thoughtfulness, yet the questions in his mind did not fully fade. The man decided that if he wanted to know the truth, he would need to test it himself. Not in a harsh or unfair way, but in a manner that would reveal her character naturally. He thought about the ways people could hide their true selves, and he realized that the best way to see the truth was to observe her when she thought no one was watching. The idea began to form in his mind, and he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. That evening, after dinner, he went to his bedroom and prepared for what he called a small experiment. He would pretend to sleep, keeping his eyes open just enough to see what happened. It was not a plan to trick her cruelly, but rather a way to see her genuine nature. He adjusted the covers, lay down carefully, and made sure the room was quiet. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the mountains seemed to hold their breath as if they too were waiting. The maid continued her work, unaware of what was about to happen. She moved through the rooms with her usual grace, humming softly to herself. She had a list of tasks to complete before the night was over, and she approached each one with focus and care. She did not notice the man in the bed pretending to sleep, though he could see every movement she made. His heart beat faster as he watched, and he reminded himself to stay calm, to simply observe without interference. Hours passed slowly. The maid tended to the fires, swept the floors, and placed fresh water by the animals. Occasionally she paused, perhaps sensing that someone was watching, though she could not be sure. She looked around the room, her expression thoughtful, and continued her work with careful attention. The man saw how deliberate she was in every action, how she adjusted small details that might seem insignificant to others, but showed her thoroughness and care. As night fell, the mansion became quieter. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire, the wind against the windows, and the soft footsteps of the maid as she completed her chores. The man's curiosity grew, but he also began to feel a strange sense of admiration. This woman, despite her condition and the difficulties she might face, carried herself with dignity and purpose. He realized that his test was not about catching her in a mistake, but about understanding her strength and character. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the maid began to prepare for her own rest. She moved with a calm that suggested trust in the quiet of the mansion. She did not know that he was watching, but her actions revealed more than words could say. The man felt a mixture of anticipation and respect as he continued to observe, ready to see the truth revealed in the simplest of actions. In that moment, the mountain man understood something important. Life in the mansion, with its wealth and solitude, was not about control or suspicion. It was about understanding the people who shared the space, seeing them as they were, and recognizing the humanity in their actions. The maid, through her careful work and quiet presence, was teaching him a lesson without ever intending to do so. He remained in his bed, pretending to sleep, but his thoughts were alive with admiration and curiosity. He realized that the next steps would be crucial, that what he was about to witness could change his perception entirely. Outside, the mountain seemed calm, but inside the mansion a story was quietly unfolding, one that would test patience, reveal character, and perhaps lead to an understanding neither of them expected. The first part of the story ended with the mansion quiet, the wind still moving through the trees, and the man lying in bed pretending to sleep. The maid moved about, carrying out her duties, unaware that her actions were being carefully observed. Both of them, in their own ways, were part of a delicate dance, a story about trust, curiosity, and the human spirit that was just beginning to unfold. The night stretched on, and the first part of this tale closed with a sense of anticipation, what the man would see next, how the maid would respond, and what truths would be revealed remained a mystery, waiting to be discovered. The mountain held its secrets, and the mansion, with its silent halls and shadowed rooms, prepared for the next chapter in a story that was far from ordinary. The night grew darker, and the mansion seemed to breathe with its own quiet life. The wind whistled softly outside, brushing against the tall pine trees, and shadows stretched long across the walls and floors. In the master's bedroom, the man lay still, eyes barely open, pretending to sleep. Every sound, every movement in the room beyond the bed was sharpened in his awareness. He had never felt this much attention on the smallest details before, and yet there was a strange excitement in observing someone without them knowing. The maid moved quietly, her footsteps soft against the polished wooden floors. She carried a basket of laundry, carefully balancing the weight as she went from room to room. Her movements were gentle, deliberate, and careful, as if every action required thought. Even in the quiet of the mansion at night, she worked with focus, humming a soft tune that seemed to fill the emptiness with warmth. The man watched her, noticing how her hands trembled slightly when she shifted her weight, likely due to her pregnancy. It was a small human detail, one that reminded him that she was not just a worker in his house, but a person with her own struggles and strength. As she folded clothes, the maid paused every now and then, her eyes scanning the room as if thinking of something deeper. She picked up a small garment, smoothing it carefully with her fingers, her face softening as she did so. The man realized that in all the time he had watched her, he had never paid attention to these quiet, tender moments. He had assumed her actions were all practical, driven by work. But now he could see the care and thought she put into everything she touched. It was simple, small, yet it spoke volumes about her character. He noticed the way she glanced toward the bedroom door occasionally, not out of suspicion, but perhaps out of habit. She moved with caution, yet there was no fear. There was only a sense of responsibility in her steps, a dedication to her duties that was rare and admirable. The man's curiosity grew. He had intended this test to see if she might act differently when she thought no one was watching. Yet the more he observed, the more he found himself respecting her quiet honesty. The mansion, usually so silent and controlled, seemed alive tonight. Every creak in the floor, every whisper of wind, every rustle of fabric became part of the story unfolding before him. He saw her stop at the fireplace, arranging the logs with care before making sure the flames were steady and safe. She adjusted the curtains, straightened the chairs, and even wiped the small dust that had settled on the edges of the shelves. It was meticulous work, but she did it with patience and grace. He had expected to see mistakes, perhaps small acts of negligence or carelessness, but instead he found diligence, thoughtfulness, and a quiet, unspoken respect for the house and its inhabitants. As she moved toward the kitchen, the man's attention sharpened. He remembered all the small concerns he had noticed before: the slightly out-of-place cloth, the window left open, the stack of papers rearranged. These little things had made him suspicious, and yet now, watching her in the calm of the night, he began to question his own judgment. Perhaps it was not carelessness, but small human errors that everyone made. Perhaps it was not deceit, but the natural rhythm of someone who worked hard, carried a burden, and was determined to do her best. The maid began to prepare a late-night snack for herself, heating water and arranging simple food on a small plate. She worked quietly, humming her soft tune again, and paused to drink slowly as if savoring the moment of rest. The man watched her carefully, noting how she moved with such purpose and care, even in these small personal tasks. It was not just her work that impressed him. It was the calm dignity in her actions, the way she faced life's challenges without complaint, and the gentle kindness in every small gesture. His mind wandered as he observed her. He thought about her life, about the struggles she might face being pregnant while working in such a demanding environment. He thought about her courage, her resilience, and the quiet strength that kept her moving forward. It was in these moments, seeing her without the veil of assumptions or suspicion, that he began to understand what true character really meant. It was not in words nor in grand actions, but in the quiet choices and the care one showed in the simplest tasks. Time seemed to stretch. The night deepened and the shadows grew longer, yet the maid continued her work with unwavering focus. She placed the plate on the counter, wiped her hands carefully, and moved toward the living room to check on the animals one last time. He saw her speak softly to the dog, petting it gently and making sure the horses had fresh water. These were small actions, almost invisible to anyone else, but they revealed a level of compassion that was impossible to ignore. The man felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of surprise and admiration for someone he had never fully understood until now. There was a pause in the room as the maid stopped near the hallway. She seemed to hesitate, her eyes scanning the rooms as if sensing something. The man held his breath, fearing that she might discover him, but she did not. Instead, she adjusted a chair slightly, straightened a picture frame, and continued on her way. Every movement was careful, precise, and yet human, showing that she was aware, thoughtful, and entirely genuine in her actions. The man's curiosity began to shift into reflection. He realized that his desire to test her honesty was unnecessary, perhaps even unfair. Here was a woman who carried herself with integrity and care, not because she was being watched, but because that was who she was. It was a quiet lesson, one that he had never expected to learn, and yet it struck him deeply. The test he had planned to see her true nature was already revealing something far more important: her strength, her humanity, and the dignity in her daily life. As the night wore on, the maid began to prepare to rest. She moved slowly toward her room, tired but satisfied with the day's work. She checked the doors, made sure the animals were safe, and then finally settled in, adjusting her blanket with care. The man remained still in his bed, pretending to sleep, but his mind was alive with thought and reflection. He realized that this woman, in her quiet, humble way, had shown him more honesty and integrity than many people he had known in his long life. He remembered the small doubts he had felt when he first noticed the minor irregularities: the misplaced cloth, the slightly open window, the papers that seemed out of order. Now he understood that these were not signs of dishonesty, but signs of a human life lived with effort and attention, not perfection. It was a lesson he had not expected to learn, and it left him both humbled and amazed. The mansion, though silent, seemed to share in the quiet revelation. The wind whispered outside, the fire crackled softly, and the shadows played along the walls. Inside, a man lay in bed, no longer just observing but thinking deeply about what it meant to trust, to judge, and to understand another person. The maid, unaware of the full extent of his attention, rested peacefully, embodying a quiet strength that would leave a lasting impression on him. The night continued, and the first moments of this test faded into reflection. The man realized that curiosity could reveal truth, but it could also reveal his own misconceptions. He had set out to see if she could be trusted, yet what he discovered was something deeper: her character, her resilience, and her quiet, human dignity. It was a reminder that the way someone behaves when they think no one is watching often speaks louder than words ever could. As part 2 of the story comes to a close, the mansion lay in quiet. The wind moved gently through the trees, and both the man and the maid rested in their own ways. One carried curiosity, reflection, and growing admiration, while the other carried quiet strength, dedication, and resilience. The night had revealed small truths, lessons in patience and understanding, and set the stage for what would come next. In the days ahead, the man would continue his observations, but he would do so with a new perspective, a deeper understanding, and a respect that had not been there before. The mountain, silent and watchful, seemed to approve of the lesson quietly unfolding within its walls. And in the mansion, in the rooms and halls that had held so many routines, a story continued to grow, one of curiosity, observation, and the gentle, human moments that reveal more about people than anything else could. The night deepened, and a calm silence settled over the mansion. The wind had quieted, leaving only the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth and the distant creaks of the wooden floors. The man lay in his bed pretending to sleep, yet his mind was alive with anticipation. He had been observing the maid for hours, noting every detail, every small movement, and every quiet gesture. So far, what he had seen filled him with admiration. But he knew that the moment of truth, the moment that would reveal her true nature, was yet to come. The maid moved softly through the hallways, carrying out the last of her nightly tasks. She had completed most of her chores, but there were a few small things that required attention. She checked the windows, making sure they were closed against the cool mountain air, and straightened the chairs in the sitting room. Her movements were careful and deliberate, a mixture of habit and mindfulness. The man watched closely, heart beating faster as he realized that soon she might enter the very room where he lay pretending to sleep. She paused outside the bedroom door. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, as if sensing something unusual. The man's chest tightened with anticipation. He had planned this moment carefully, imagining what he might see, yet he could not predict her reaction. Would she act normally? Would she do something that revealed a hidden side of herself? Or would she betray the trust she had always shown? His mind raced with possibilities, each one more uncertain than the last. Finally, she opened the door slowly, stepping into the room. The man held his breath, keeping perfectly still beneath the covers. He could feel the tension in the air, the quiet awareness that this was a delicate moment. She moved toward the bed, her eyes scanning the room as if making sure everything was in order. Her face was calm, her expression thoughtful, and her steps careful. She carried herself with a quiet grace, each movement deliberate yet natural, and the man could not take his eyes off her. As she approached the bed, she paused again. The man could see her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility she carried. She had worked hard all day, cared for herself despite her pregnancy, and ensured the mansion was in order. Yet, there was something more in her pause. A moment She adjusted a small pillow on the bed, smoothing it carefully with her hands. The man realized that this simple act, unnoticed by anyone else, spoke volumes. It showed her attention to detail, her respect for the space, and the care she took even when no one was watching. He felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. This was not the behavior of someone hiding deceit or malice. This was the behavior of someone genuine, someone honest, and someone who took responsibility for their actions. The maid's gaze shifted toward him. For a brief moment, it seemed as if she might sense that he was awake. Yet she continued without hesitation. She adjusted the blanket, making sure it lay neatly across the bed, and then stepped back slightly. Her movements were fluid, natural, and full of purpose. The man's heart pounded as he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. The true nature of her character was about to reveal itself. She moved toward the dresser, picking up a small item and placing it carefully in its proper spot. The man watched every detail, noticing how she handled objects with care, how she respected the space she moved through, and how her actions reflected a quiet integrity. She did not act differently because she thought she was being observed. She acted naturally, guided by her own sense of right and wrong. The man felt a deep sense of respect and humility. He had doubted her before, and now he saw that those doubts had been unfounded. As she finished tidying the room, she paused once more by the bedside. Her eyes softened and she took a deep breath. For a moment, she seemed to reflect on the day, on the work she had done, and on the life she carried within her. The man realized that this pause was not hesitation but a moment of quiet strength, a testament to her resilience and courage. He had set out to test her honesty, but what he witnessed was something far more profound. She then did something unexpected. Instead of simply leaving the room, she reached for a small object on the nightstand, a token of care left by the man earlier in the day. She held it gently as if considering its importance and then placed it in a safe spot. The action was simple, yet it spoke volumes. It showed that she respected not only the house and its routines, but also the personal space and trust of the man who lived there. The man's chest tightened with emotion. He had expected a test of honesty, but he had found a demonstration of integrity, thoughtfulness, and humanity. The man's mind raced with reflection. He thought about all the times he had judged people hastily, assumed intentions without understanding, or let suspicion cloud his perception. Here was a woman who had done nothing to earn his doubts, yet she had carried herself with such grace and dignity that it left him humbled. He realized that trust was not built by testing others, but by observing and understanding the choices they made in everyday life. The maid's actions had taught him a lesson that no words could convey. She stepped back, her tasks complete, and turned to leave the room. The man's eyes followed her, capturing every detail. The careful way she moved, the gentle tilt of her head, the quiet strength in her posture. As she reached the door, she paused again, glancing back briefly as if to ensure everything was in order. The man realized that this glance was not suspicion or fear, but a reflection of her conscientious nature. She cared deeply about her responsibilities and the people she served, and she carried that care into every action, no matter how small. Once she left, the man exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief, admiration, and humility washing over him. He realized that he had learned more from this quiet observation than from any book, conversation, or lesson in his life. The truth about her character had been revealed not through words but through actions, through the choices she made when she thought no one was watching. And in that revelation, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for what he had seen but for the insight it had given him into his own behavior and assumptions. The mansion settled into an even deeper silence. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room. The man remained in his bed, not out of fear or suspicion, but out of a newfound respect for the woman who had just walked through his life in such a simple, profound way. He understood now that trust was fragile, that judgment could be hasty, and that true character often revealed itself in the smallest, most private actions. He thought about the challenges she must face, being pregnant, working tirelessly, and managing her duties with care. Yet she carried it all with a quiet strength that left him in awe. He realized that her actions tonight had done more than demonstrate honesty. They had shown resilience, patience, and the kind of human dignity that inspired respect and reflection. He felt both humbled and enlightened, understanding that the lesson of the night was not about testing her, but about learning to see people as they truly were. Outside, the mountain air remained cool and still. The stars shone faintly above the peaks, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. Inside the mansion, the quiet life of the household continued, but something had shifted. The man lay in bed, no longer merely observing but thinking deeply about what he had witnessed. He realized that the maid's honesty was unquestionable, her integrity undeniable, and her humanity unmistakable. The night stretched on, and with it, the man's thoughts turned to reflection. He understood that life was full of assumptions and doubts, But moments like these reminded him that character and truth were revealed not through confrontation or tests, but through observation, empathy, and patience. He thought about the many people he had misjudged in his life and the lessons he had overlooked. And in that quiet night, watching a woman move with care and dignity, he found a new understanding of trust, respect, and the subtle strength of the human spirit. Finally, the man allowed himself to relax, no longer needing to pretend to sleep. He sat up slightly, gazing at the empty room, and felt a sense of clarity he had not expected. The maid had done nothing extraordinary in the grand sense, yet her actions had revealed a profound truth, that honesty, integrity, and kindness often shine brightest when they are unnoticed. He realized that he had learned more from her tonight than from anyone he had ever met, and that realization filled him with both humility and admiration. The mansion, once so full of quiet tension, now seemed peaceful in a different way. The fire crackled softly, the shadows danced gently across the walls, and the night carried a sense of calm and understanding. The man reflected on what had happened, knowing that the events of this evening would stay with him for a long time. He had set out to test her, but instead, he had been taught a lesson in humanity, trust, and respect, a lesson that was far more valuable than he could have imagined. As part 3 ends, the stage is set for what comes next. The man has witnessed the maid's true nature, yet the story is far from over. There are still moments to come, challenges to face, and lessons to learn. The night has revealed honesty, care, and quiet strength, and the days ahead promise reflection, understanding, and perhaps a deepening of respect and connection between the two. The mansion, silent and watchful, holds its secrets, but tonight, it has also held a revelation, one that will shape the story yet to unfold. The mansion was quiet now, the kind of quiet that felt alive, almost as if it were holding its breath. The fire in the hearth flickered gently, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The mountain air outside whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold stone. In the master's bedroom, the man remained in bed, eyes barely open, still pretending to sleep. He had been observing the maid for hours, and each action she had taken had revealed more about her than he had ever imagined. Yet he knew that the moment he had been waiting for was near. She moved with purpose, her steps soft and careful on the polished wooden floors. Tonight was not just any night. She seemed to carry an unspoken energy, a determination in her movements that the man could sense even from where he lay. She had finished most of her chores, yet there was something else drawing her attention, something he could not predict. His curiosity and anticipation grew with every second. He felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The truth, he realized, was about to reveal itself in a way he could never have expected. The maid stopped in the middle of the hallway, taking a deep breath. She seemed to pause, as if thinking through something important. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, a quiet reminder of the life she carried within her. The man's heart skipped a beat. He had watched her for so long, trying to understand her character, and now, seeing her like this, he felt a profound respect for her strength and courage. Pregnancy had not slowed her down. It had in some ways made her presence even more compelling. She moved closer to the bedroom, her movements measured and deliberate. The man held his breath, trying to remain unnoticed. He could feel his pulse quicken as she reached the door. Every detail of her actions seemed amplified in the quiet of the night. The slight hesitation in her step, the gentle tilt of her head, the careful placement of her hands. She did not rush, yet there was a clear sense of purpose in what she was about to do. As she entered the room, the man saw her glance at the bed. His chest tightened. He had imagined many possible outcomes, yet nothing had prepared him for what she did next. Instead of ignoring the bed or continuing her chores elsewhere, she approached it with careful consideration. Her hands reached for a small folded cloth that had been left there earlier. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a simple object he had never expected to see her touch. The man froze, his eyes widening. She placed the object carefully in a safe spot, almost reverently, as if it were something precious. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and full of intention. The man realized that this was more than a simple action. It was a demonstration of her honesty, her respect, and her integrity. She had chosen to protect something that belonged to him without being told, without expectation, simply because it was the right thing to do. His mind raced as he observed her. He had doubted her, had questioned her character, and even planned this test to see if she could be trusted. Yet here she was, proving not just her honesty, but her courage and sense of responsibility. The man felt a wave of emotion he had not expected: relief, admiration, and a deep, humbling respect. He had set out to test her, but the test had revealed something far greater than he could have imagined. The maid then did something even more unexpected. She moved closer to the window, adjusting the curtains to let in the soft moonlight. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, and then knelt down, placing her hand gently on the floor as if steadying herself. The man watched in stunned silence as she carefully reached for a small envelope that had been tucked away under a chair. She held it delicately, examining it briefly before placing it safely on the dresser. It was a small, simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. She had not been careless or negligent. She had acted with thoughtfulness and care, ensuring that nothing was lost or misplaced. The man realized that this was the essence of her character. She took responsibility without being asked. She acted with honesty without expectation, and she treated the space and the people within it with respect and integrity. He felt a deep sense of awe. As she stood and moved toward the bed once more, the man's chest tightened again. He had seen her in many moments, but this was different. There was a quiet courage in her posture, a calm determination that radiated from her very being. She adjusted the blanket once more, smoothing it carefully, and then leaned slightly over the bed. For a moment, the man thought she might speak, but she did not. Her actions alone conveyed more truth than words ever could. The man felt a lump in his throat. He had doubted her, questioned her intentions, and even planned this test out of curiosity. Yet all of his doubts were gone. In their place was a profound respect for her strength, her integrity, and her humanity. He realized that the test he had set up was unnecessary. He had already learned what he needed to know. Her character was clear, undeniable, and inspiring. The maid finally straightened, taking a step back from the bed. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on each corner, each detail as if ensuring everything was in order. The man could see the care in her gaze, the thoughtfulness in her stance, and the quiet strength in her presence. She moved with purpose yet with grace, carrying herself in a way that demanded neither attention nor praise, yet earned both silently. He reflected on everything he had seen tonight. Every small action, every careful movement, every moment of quiet thoughtfulness revealed a person of exceptional character. The maid had acted honestly, responsibly, and courageously, not because she was being watched, but because it was who she was. The man felt a mix of emotions: humility for his own doubts, gratitude for the lesson he had witnessed, and admiration for the quiet heroism of her everyday actions. As she prepared to leave the room, the man realized that this night would remain with him forever. He had learned that true character is revealed not in words or grand gestures, but in the small, careful choices people make when no one is watching. The maid had shown him honesty, courage, and integrity in ways he had never imagined, and he felt a deep sense of respect and awe. She turned briefly, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment. There was no suspicion, no accusation, only the calm confidence of someone who knew they had done right. The man felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief and admiration. He realized that he had misjudged her, that his curiosity had been unnecessary, and that the truth was far simpler and more beautiful than he could have imagined. Outside, the night remained calm, the wind gentle against the trees, and the stars faintly shining above. Inside the mansion, the quiet drama of human character had unfolded, leaving the man changed, enlightened, and deeply moved. He had set out to observe her for a test, yet what he had discovered was far more profound: the strength, honesty, and humanity of a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. The man lay back, no longer pretending to sleep, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He thought about the courage it took for her to live each day with integrity, the patience it took to manage her duties while pregnant, and the humility she displayed in every small act. The lesson of the night was clear. True character is revealed in the quiet moments, in the unseen actions, and in the choices people make out of care, not obligation. He remembered the small doubts he had felt earlier: the misplaced cloth, the window left slightly open, the rearranged papers. He realized now that these were minor human imperfections, not signs of dishonesty or ill intent. What mattered was the consistency of her integrity, the care she showed even when no one was watching, and the courage she carried in her quiet. unassuming way. The man exhaled slowly, a sense of peace washing over him. He had learned a lesson he would never forget. The maid had shown him that honesty and integrity are not tested through schemes or tricks, but revealed in the simple, careful choices of daily life. Her actions had frozen him in surprise, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were profoundly human, deeply sincere, and unexpectedly powerful. As part 4 comes to a close, the mansion remained quiet, holding its secrets, but also holding a revelation. The man lay in bed, his mind alive with reflection, and the maid moved through the hallways with quiet grace, unaware of the full impact her actions had on him. The night had revealed honesty, courage, and human dignity, and it had set the stage for the final part of the story, a resolution of understanding, respect, and the quiet bond formed through observation and trust. Morning arrived slowly over the mountains. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, and the air carried the fresh scent of pine and earth. Inside the mansion, the first rays of sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the rooms that had been quiet throughout the night. The man stirred in his bed, no longer pretending to sleep. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind, and a sense of reflection washed over him. What he had witnessed, the honesty, care, and quiet strength of the maid, had changed something inside him. He rose from his bed and walked slowly to the window, looking out at the mountains. The landscape seemed calmer now, almost as if the world itself acknowledged the quiet lessons that had unfolded within the mansion. He thought about the maid, the way she had moved through the rooms, the careful way she had handled every task, and the courage she displayed without asking for recognition. Her actions had revealed a truth he had not expected to see, and it left him feeling both humbled and enlightened. He moved through the halls with a quiet reverence, noticing for the first time the little details that often went overlooked. The chairs were straightened, the floors spotless, and the small touches of care she had left in each room were visible to anyone who looked closely. He realized that her diligence and integrity had not been shown to impress anyone, but because that was simply who she was. The lesson was clear. True character did not seek attention, and honesty did not need verification. As the maid began her day, she moved with the same quiet strength and determination as always. She carried out her chores efficiently, attending to the animals, tidying the rooms, and preparing breakfast. Yet something had changed. The man's perception of her had shifted completely. He no longer saw a worker whose honesty might need testing. He saw a human being of remarkable courage, patience, and dignity. He admired the way she managed her life with responsibility. Despite the difficulties she faced, the man decided to speak with her, not to test her again, but to acknowledge what he had seen and to express his respect. He found her in the kitchen, placing fresh bread on the table. She glanced up, offering a soft, polite smile. There was no suspicion in her eyes, no hint that she had known of his observations. She carried herself with the same calm dignity as always, completely unaware of the impact her actions had had on him. He cleared his throat softly, and as he reflected on his own behavior, on the doubts and curiosity that had led him to pretend to sleep and observe her secretly, he realized that while his intentions had been cautious, he had underestimated the value of trust and the lessons that come from simply watching and understanding. He had expected a simple answer to a question of honesty, but he had found a revelation about humanity, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from living rightly. In the weeks that followed, the mansion settled into a new rhythm. The man moved through his day with greater awareness, no longer suspicious but thoughtful and reflective. He began to treat his household with a newfound respect, recognizing the human effort and care that went into each small task. The maid continued her work, her dignity and perseverance remaining unchanged, yet her presence now held a different significance. She had unknowingly become a teacher, and he had become a student of quiet strength and integrity. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly over the mountains, the man walked through the hallways, noticing the meticulous order of the rooms and the subtle touches of care she had left behind. He paused in front of a small table where she had placed a few freshly folded linens. For a moment he simply observed, appreciating the thoughtfulness in her actions. He realized that this was what true character looked like: consistent, patient, and kind, revealed not in grand gestures, but in the details of everyday life. He found her later in the garden, tending to a small patch of herbs and flowers. She smiled softly as he approached, and he returned the gesture with warmth. "You have shown me something important," he said quietly. "Not just through your words, but through everything you do. Your strength and honesty have taught me a lesson I will not forget." The maid looked at him for a moment, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I only do what I can," she replied simply. "I do not need recognition. I just try to do what is right." Her words carried humility and wisdom, and they struck the man deeply. He realized that her strength was not in seeking approval, but in consistently living by her principles. As the days passed, their relationship changed. It was still professional, yet it carried a new dimension: mutual respect, understanding, and quiet appreciation. The man no longer felt the need to test her. He trusted her completely, and he found that in letting go of suspicion and embracing understanding, he felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that he had never known before. He often reflected on that night when he had pretended to sleep, observing her quietly. What had started as a test of honesty had become a lesson in humanity. He had learned that true character cannot be measured by schemes or tricks, but by the consistency, care, and integrity with which someone lives their life. And he had learned that sometimes the people we underestimate have the greatest lessons to teach us. The mansion, once filled with quiet tension and careful observation, now felt alive in a new way. The walls seemed warmer, the air lighter, and the presence of the maid carried a quiet strength that filled the rooms without fanfare. The man understood that wealth and control could not create the depth of character he had witnessed. It came from the heart, from daily choices, and from living with honesty, care, and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned golden, the man sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the doubts he had carried, the curiosity that had led him to test her, and the surprise he had felt at her actions. Most of all, he thought about the lesson she had taught him without even trying. That true integrity is revealed in the quiet, thoughtful acts of everyday life, and that human strength often shines brightest in the simplest moments. He realized that life in the mansion would never be the same. The observation had changed him, opened his mind, and deepened his understanding of trust and character. He no longer needed to question her, no longer needed to watch for mistakes, and no longer felt the weight of suspicion. Instead, he carried a sense of respect, admiration, and gratitude, a feeling that would guide him in all his future interactions. The maid continued her work, caring for the household and carrying herself with quiet dignity. She never sought praise or recognition, yet she had earned it in the most profound way. The man understood now that her actions were a reflection of her inner strength and humanity, qualities that could not be fabricated or tested, but only seen and appreciated by those willing to observe with patience and an open heart. As Part 5 comes to a close, the mansion stood quiet under the starry night, the fire burning low and the wind whispering softly through the trees. The man and the maid, each in their own way, had reached a new understanding. Trust had been established, respect had been earned, and a silent bond of admiration and humanity had formed. The story of observation, patience, and revelation had reached its end, leaving behind a lasting lesson about the quiet power of integrity and the depth of human character.